Hello, I'm Big Bison T on the Aliens Legacy Forum, and I'm just going to be talking a little bit about how I go about metal working and making the Colonial Marines armor. Any armor, really. This could be useful for anybody who's working on a budget, trying to work with aluminum to get metal armor. First thing we're going to talk about is some of the tools that I use. All right, and as for those tools, there are two that you're really going to have to just buy. It is not really possible or recommended to do it without it. They don't have to be fancy. They don't have to be some crazy high quality. These are actually super cheap. I think I got this one even from Harbor Freight, and this one on Amazon, it wasn't too bad. That is a vise and an anvil. Doesn't have to be this amazing sized anvil. Aluminum is pretty light. You don't need to heat it or anneal it to make it workable, especially when you're working with thinner gauges like we will be. And so you don't need anything huge. You just need something that is flat that you can beat on with a hammer. The other thing is this vise. The vise you get does not have to be a sliding vise. I like this one especially because it's just heavy and portable. It is crazy heavy, but not so heavy you can't transport it back and forth between work or school or home or upstairs in your bedroom, downstairs in your basement, in the garage. It is wide enough and heavy enough that it can generally hold about anything, which in combination with your anvil, you can get some elevation to be able to work sides, corners, all around in front and behind, and it gives you something extremely sturdy to beat on when it comes time to hit things with the aluminum. The other thing that this vise is useful for is working with stakes. A proper blacksmith is going to have many elaborate stakes that they plant, usually in these holes of an anvil, but it's much larger. We do not have that kind of budget, so we are improvising. Some useful things that I have used as stakes is you clamp down a ball hitch. Gives you a small rounded surface that you can beat on. You can easily drop in various chisels, clamp them down with ease, have different sizes, heights, widths, everything. And these lock in crazy tight for when you're putting things into it and beating on those with a hammer. And you can even get real creative. I have just cut down various edges and rounded off edges of just random scrap. When tightened down, a lot of times I have a much easier time making the lips on the armor with small pieces, just beating on these edges with that. Various rounded edges. You can actually put that in and use that as a stake when you hammer it down, or clamp it down with the vise. For larger pieces, for dishing, doming, or even planishing, I have found some 5.5-inch weld-on steel caps that I have welded on, don't mind the weld job, to just some 2-inch square tube. With that locked in tight, I now have a proper dishing stake. Whereas, you know, an actual dishing stake would cost at least $200. This will get the job done on aluminum. You don't need to deal with the heavy dutyest, nicest of the stuff on the planet when you're dealing with aluminum because it's very workable. In addition to those tools, obviously you're going to need an assortment of hammers. I use these two most. Again, these are Harbor Freight. These are not fancy, but I am not a professional blacksmith dealing with steel. I'm dealing with aluminum. So this gets the job done. You got the nice small side, the broad side, and then for planishing and dishing, you got the big wide hammer that's not going to leave as many marks. Other hammers can't hurt. I mean, more hammer options, usually the better. Obviously, it goes without saying, you're going to need some work gloves, various Sharpies. For getting your pieces out, I use an angle grinder you can get special aluminum discs for those to cut that, to get the rough shape out. Then you got the tin snips to refine your shapes. Usually I will use vintage aluminum sleds, you know, like the Griswold family vacation style. They often come fairly dented up, but that's okay because we can hammer just about anything out. The main thing you want to try to avoid is punctures like this. But in this project that I've started, we had to cannibalize 4 of these sleds. They go anywhere from 30 to 60 bucks each online, which honestly is not really more expensive than buying the same gauge aluminum in a sheet. And the sleds are already, half the dishing is already done. You've already got the curvatures on most of your pieces, so you're really going to save yourself some time. And if your time is worth any money to you, it might be worth it to pay a little extra just to get the vintage sleds. And if you feel bad cutting up an antique, I've really got no argument to defend myself there. It's just easier to do this. So those are the primary tools that we are going to use to do like 95% of our work. Once we get to the refining stage to strap it up, of course, you may want to have a Dremel tool and a drills with various size bits. The Dremel tool is going to be pretty valuable later, but that is all down the road. When you're just getting started, the main thing you're going to want to get is the hammers, the anvil, the vise, and whatever you can find that you think is going to be useful as a stake. Keep in mind, if you are using wood chisels, you are going to want to round the edges off a bit. You don't know how well that shows up there, but you're not going to want to puncture things. You're going to want to make them dull a little bit. But once you get that foundation, you're ready to start cutting out your shapes and start banging on some metal. I think it goes without saying that you don't really, you can freehand all these shapes if you want to, if you're very familiar with the stuff, but it's better to sometimes make your shape in paper first. The number one thing everybody does when making replica props without having the actual in front of them is everybody wants to make things too big. They feel bigger than life, so we want to make them bigger than life, and everything ends up being oversized and clunky. So work on a paper version of what you're trying to assemble first. I know it's not always easy with a full body armor to figure this out, but just as big as you think it is, trust me, it's almost always never that big. Do it in paper first and make templates. From there, you can trace it onto your aluminum when you cut it out. That was the real rough version. This is the more refined version, because this is the better side to work with, so I drew it on here. So do everything in paper first. Especially on round shapes, it's going to be a little bit tough, but if you sort out all the details on paper, you're going to have a much easier time with the metal. You do not want to be drastically resizing metal after you've cut it. So work it out on paper.